Mr. Shoemaker here to bring you a two-part series on the memoir of William Henry Singleton. Now we're going to read through the first three discussion questions in the first part, and then the last three in the second part. Let's get to it. I have lived through the greatest epoch in history, having been born on August 10th, 1835, at New Bern, North Carolina. That was not so many years ago, after the adoption of the Declaration of Independence and the willing of the Revolutionary War. But in the country of the Declaration of Independence, I was born a slave, for I was a black man. For in the eyes of the law, I was but a thing. I was bought and sold. But I lived to see the institution of slavery into which I was born, and which I was for many years a victim, pass away. I wore the uniform of those men in blue, who through 4 years of suffering wiped away with their blood the stain of slavery. I met, too, the great man who led those men as their great commander-in-chief. He shook hands with me, yes, talked to me. I can still see his sad, tired, worn face as he talked to me that day. All right, we got our first discussion question. What historical events has William Henry Singleton mentioned to this point? And what does he say that gives you clues? Feel free to pause this at any time so you can answer these questions. I'm going to continue on. Comparing my position now, living in a good home with my wife, with friends, respected in my community, with the same rights that every other man has, those days of my boyhood seem like a dream. But folks who know my story like to hear me tell about those days, how we lived and what we thought about, how we were treated. So I recall for them, for my friends, and for other folk who, though they do not know me, might like to hear a true story that may seem as strange to them as a fairy tale. My master's estate was one of the largest in Craven County, North Carolina, and he had more slaves than any others. The first thing I remember is playing on the plantation with my little brothers and with other slave children while the men and women were in the cotton, corn, and potato fields working during the day. One day, when I was about 4 years old, a strange man came to the central house where all of us children were and asked me if I liked candy. I told him yes. So he gave me a striped stick of candy. Then he asked me if I liked him. I said yes, sir, because he had given me the candy. He asked me then how I would like to go and live with him. Of course, I did not know him, nor the colored woman he was with, but without saying any more, the man took me away with him and gave me to the strange woman who took me to Atlanta, Georgia, and delivered me to a woman who had bought me. Such breaking up of families and parting of children from their parents was quite common in slavery days, and was one of the things that caused much bitterness among the slaves and much suffering. Most of the work done in the South those days was done by slaves. Slaves were ginners. That is, they knew how to run cotton gins. But they were carpenters, ship carpenters, blacksmiths, and farmers. Young as I was sold the first time. I had all I wanted to eat. Of course, I had hardly any clothes, but then I did not need many clothes to keep me warm. I did not have any bed to sleep on. Simply slept on the dirt floor by the fireplace in the house like a little dog. One day, when I was about 7 years old, my master sent me to run an errand. I suddenly decided to run away, and I did. There on the streets I ran across an old colored man who asked me my name and what part of the country I was from, and what my mother's name was. He pointed to the road that led to New Bern and said I might get a ride on the stage. But don't tell anybody your name, he said. If they ask you your name, you don't know, and keep going. Got our second discussion question here. Why do you think the man William Henry Singleton just encountered told him not to tell anybody his name if they asked? All right, continuing on. Luckily, the first door I knocked at when I reached the Singleton plantation happened to be the door of my mother's house. But of course, I did not know my mother. So when she opened the door and asked me what I wanted, I made my usual reply, I don't know. I did not know my mother, and she did not know me. She said, What do you want, little boy? I said, I'm looking for my mother. Your mother? Yes, ma'am. Just then my older brother Hardy came to the door and said, Mama, That's Henry." My mother said, "No, it isn't. That child wouldn't know how to get back here alone like that. When he went from here, he was nothing but a baby." My mother said, "I won't believe it's Henry, except that I can see a scar on the back of his neck where he was burned. If it is there now, I will believe it's Henry." But when I heard this, I was afraid, because I didn't know I had a scar there, and I thought it was a trap to catch me. So I ran, but Hardy ran me down, and my mother found the scar, and then I was all right. One Sunday morning, my mother and brothers went to a camp meeting and left me behind in the cellar of their home. There were cracks in the cellar through which I could see out the doors. Looking out, I saw there were some biscuits on a fence not far away. That was one of the tricks the masters had to catch slaves who were hiding. They would put food on the fences where a slave they suspected of being in hiding, could see it, in the hope that they would get hungry and venture out and take it, and thus reveal himself. That is what happened to me, and they sold me at the time to an overseer of the plantation. All right, we're here at our final discussion question for part 1. Put yourself in William Henry Singleton's shoes for a moment. Reflect on all you have gone through up until this point. How would you feel if this happened to you? And why would you feel that way? All right, friends, I'll catch you next time in part 2 of the William Henry Singleton memoir.